Hey Reddit, I'm Alex, 32, and let's just say my family reunion didn't exactly go as planned. After years of being the so-called family failure, I decided to show up unannounced at my grandpa's 80th birthday party. I thought it would be a chance to reconnect, but the moment my parents saw me, all hell broke loose. What they didn't know was that I wasn't the same person they'd kicked around for years, and this time I wasn't leaving quietly. What happened next? Well, let's just say they got a taste of karma they'll never forget. Growing up, I was always the black sheep. My older brother, Eric, was the golden child, straight A's, star athlete, the kid who could do no wrong. Meanwhile, I was the kid who struggled through school, bounced between jobs after college, and never quite measured up to my parents' impossibly high standards. No matter what I did, it was never enough. You'll never amount to anything if you keep wasting your time, Dad would say. Why can't you be more like Eric? Mom would add, her disappointment practically dripping from every word. By the time I hit my mid-20s, I'd had enough. I cut ties with my family and moved to a different city, determined to build a life on my own terms. It wasn't easy. There were plenty of late nights, ramen dinners, and moments when I questioned if I'd made the right choice. But slowly, things started to fall into place. I found a career I loved, built a solid group of friends, and eventually started my own business, a small but successful tech consulting firm that I built from the ground up. For the first time in my life, I was proud of what I'd accomplished. But my family? They had no idea. Fast forward to a few months ago, when I got a call from my cousin Jenna. Hey Alex, just want to let you know we're throwing a big party for Grandpa's 80th birthday next month. It's at Uncle Mike's place. You should come. It's been way too long. I hesitated. I hadn't seen most of my family in nearly 8 years, and I wasn't exactly eager to dive back into that toxic environment. But Grandpa had always been different. He was the one person who believed in me when no one else did, the one who encouraged me to chase my dreams, even when the rest of the family thought I was wasting my time. I don't know, Jenna, I said, unsure. I'm not sure my parents would be too thrilled to see me. Screw them, she replied bluntly. Grandpa would love to see you. And besides, don't you want to show them what you've made of yourself? Her words stuck with me. Maybe it was petty, but a part of me did want to show up and prove to everyone that I wasn't the failure they thought I was, that I'd built a life they could only dream of. So I made up my mind. I was going. The party was held at my Uncle Mike's place, a sprawling estate just outside the city, complete with a massive backyard, a pool, and a patio big enough to host half the neighborhood. By the time I arrived, the place was already packed with family members I hadn't seen in years. I stepped out of my car, smoothed down my suit, and took a deep breath. It was time to face the past. As I walked up the driveway, a few heads turned my way, some with surprise, others with barely concealed judgment. I spotted Jenna near the patio and made a beeline for her. Alex, she squealed, pulling me into a tight hug. You actually came. Wouldn't miss it, I replied, scanning the crowd for a familiar face. And then I saw him, Grandpa, sitting in a lawn chair near the grill, surrounded by a few of my uncles. His eyes lit up the moment he spotted me. Alex, he called, waving me over. Get over here, boy. I made my way through the crowd and hugged him tightly, feeling a lump rise in my throat. Happy birthday, Grandpa. It's good to see you. Good to see you too, he said, clapping me on the back. Look at you. All grown up. What have you been up to, huh? Before I could answer, a familiar voice cut through the air like a knife. Well, look who decided to show up. I turned to see my parents standing a few feet away, their expressions a mix of surprise and thinly veiled disdain. Alex, Mom said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. I didn't think we'd be seeing you today. Guess I wanted to surprise Grandpa. I replied, forcing a polite smile. Dad crossed his arms, eyeing me up and down. Must have taken a break from whatever it is you're doing these days. Here we go. I run my own business now, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Oh, really? Mom replied with a raised eyebrow. And what kind of business would that be? Tech consulting, I said simply. I started a few years ago. It's doing well. Dad chuckled under his breath. Tech consulting. Sounds like a fancy way of saying you mess around with computers all day. A few of my cousins nearby exchanged awkward glances, clearly sensing the tension. I clenched my jaw, willing myself to stay calm. I built something I'm proud of, I said firmly. And I'm doing just fine, thanks. Mom's smile tightened. Well, that's nice. But success isn't just about money. It's about family too. And you haven't exactly been around much, have you? My pulse spiked. I wasn't exactly welcome the last time I was around, was I? Dad took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. Watch your tone. No, you watch yours. I shot back, the anger that had been simmering for years bubbling to the surface. You spent my whole life treating me like a disappointment, like I'd never be good enough no matter what I did. So yeah, I left, and I built a life without your constant judgment. People were starting to stare now. Conversations had quieted as heads turned toward us. Maybe you should leave now, Dad growled, his voice low but dangerous. Before I could respond, Grandpa's voice cut through the tension like a whip. Enough. Everyone froze. Grandpa pushed himself to his feet, leaning heavily on his cane as he stepped between us. This is my birthday, and I won't have this nonsense ruining it. You hear me? Dad opened his mouth, but Grandpa cut him off with a glare that could have melted steel. And as for you, Grandpa said, pointing a finger at Dad, I've had enough of the way you treat Alex. You've never given that boy the credit he deserves, not when he was a kid and not now. But let me tell you something. He's got more guts and determination than you'll ever understand. Dad, Mom began, but Grandpa silenced her with a look. I'm not finished, he said, his voice sharp as a whip. Alex may not have followed the path you wanted, but he's made something of himself, and he did it without your help. So instead of tearing him down, maybe you ought to be proud of the man he's become. A stunned silence fell over the crowd. For the first time in my life, I saw genuine shame flicker across my parents' faces. Grandpa turned to me, his expression softening. And you, Alex? I'm proud of you, son. Always have been. Always will be. My throat tightened, and I swallowed hard. Thanks, Grandpa. That means more than you know. After that, the party continued with a different energy. My parents stayed on the other side of the yard, avoiding me for the rest of the evening. But it didn't matter. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged, like I didn't need their approval to be proud of who I'd become. And as I stood by the grill, laughing with my cousins and sipping a cold beer, I realized something. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't proving people wrong. It's proving to yourself that you were right all along. If I thought my parents were going to back off after Grandpa's speech, I was dead wrong. The rest of the party passed in a blur of awkward glances and whispered conversations. Every time I caught sight of Mom or Dad, their expressions were a mixture of frustration and something I couldn't quite place, resentment. Maybe pride was a hard pill to swallow, and I had a feeling they weren't ready to choke it down just yet. But I wasn't there for them. I was there for Grandpa, and if they couldn't handle seeing me succeed, that was their problem, not mine. Later that evening, after most of the guests had left, I found myself sitting on the patio with Grandpa, sipping a glass of bourbon while the distant hum of conversation drifted from inside the house. You know, he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, I always knew you'd make something of yourself. You just needed time to figure out your own path. Wish my parents had seen it that way, I muttered, staring at the ice cubes clinking softly in my glass. Grandpa chuckled, a low, rough sound that carried years of hard-earned wisdom. Your parents, they've always been a little too focused on appearances, on what other people think. But that's their burden to carry, not yours. I glanced over at him. You're not mad that I stayed away all these years? He shook his head. I missed you, sure, but I understood why you needed to go. Sometimes the only way to grow is to get a little distance from the people holding you back. Before I could respond, the sliding glass door behind us opened, and Mom stepped onto the patio. Her smile was tight, her posture stiff. Alex, she said, her tone carefully neutral. Can we talk for a minute? Grandpa raised an eyebrow, clearly debating whether to stay or leave us alone. I nodded slightly, signaling that it was okay. With a soft grunt, he pushed himself up from his chair and disappeared back inside, leaving us in the heavy silence of the evening. Mom sat down across from me, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her skirt. For a moment, she just stared at her hands, as if searching for the right words. I didn't expect you to show up today, she said finally. Yeah, I got that impression, I replied dryly. She winced but pressed on. I know things have been difficult between us. Your father and I, we had high hopes for you. We just wanted you to reach your full potential. By calling me a failure every chance you got, I shot back, the bitterness in my voice sharper than I intended. Mom's gaze snapped up to meet mine. That's not fair. We pushed you because we knew you were capable of more. We didn't want you to settle for less than you deserved. I laughed, though there was no humor in it. Do you even hear yourself? You weren't pushing me. You were tearing me down. Every time I stumbled, you made sure I knew I wasn't good enough. And when I finally left to figure things out on my own, you wrote me off like I didn't exist. That's not true, isn't it? I interrupted. 8 years, Mom. 8 years without so much as a phone call. Not even a text. She flinched, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. But then she straightened her shoulders, the mask of control slipping back into place. You chose to leave, she said, her voice tight. We didn't push you away. You walked out on us. I set my glass down with a little more force than necessary, the ice clinking sharply against the crystal. I left because I had to. Staying meant drowning in your constant disappointment. And you know what? Leaving was the best decision I ever made. I built a life for myself, a life I'm proud of. But you wouldn't know that, would you? Because you never cared enough to find out. The air between us crackled with unspoken words and years of resentment. Before Mom could respond, the sliding door opened again, and this time, Dad stepped outside. His gaze flicked between us, instantly assessing the situation. What's going on? He asked, his tone more demand than question. Nothing, Mom said quickly, standing as if to shield him from the conversation. Alex and I were just catching up. Dad's eyes narrowed. Is that what you call it? He stepped closer, his presence as imposing as ever. Because it sounded to me like you're stirring up trouble, just like always. I stood slowly, my pulse pounding in my ears. You know what, Dad? I'm tired of this. I came here to celebrate Grandpa's birthday, not to rehash every mistake you think I've made. If you can't handle the fact that I've built a life without your approval, that's on you. But I'm done playing the family failure just to make you feel superior. Dad's face darkened. Don't you dare talk to me like that. You got some nerve showing up here after all these years. I have nerve. I shot back, stepping closer. I spent my whole life trying to live up to your impossible expectations. And when I couldn't, you treated me like I was worthless. Well, guess what? I'm not that kid anymore. I built a business, a career. Hell, I built a life that doesn't revolve around your approval. And I don't owe you a damn thing. For a moment, we just stood there, the air between us thick with years of unspoken resentment. Then Grandpa's voice cut through the tension like a whip. What the hell is going on out here? We all turned to see him standing in the doorway, his eyes blazing with a fury I hadn't seen since I was a kid. Dad, Mom began, but he silenced her with a look. I've had enough of this nonsense, he growled, stepping onto the patio. This is supposed to be a celebration, not a battleground. And I'll be damned if I let you two ruin it with your petty grudges. But Dad started, but Grandpa wasn't having it. No buts, he snapped, his voice sharp as steel. You've spent years tearing Alex down, making him feel like he wasn't good enough. But let me tell you something. He's got more guts, more determination, and more heart than you'll ever understand. So unless you've got something good to say, I suggest you keep your damn mouth shut. Dad's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. And you, Grandpa said, turning to Mom, you're not blameless in this either. You let your pride get in the way of being a mother to your own son. Well, guess what? Pride won't keep you warm when you're old and alone. Mom's eyes filled with tears, but Grandpa didn't soften. You both need to decide what matters more, your pride or your family. Because if you don't, you're going to lose the only son you've got. Silence fell over the patio, heavy with the weight of words that couldn't be taken back. Finally, Grandpa turned to me, his gaze steady. Alex, you've got nothing to prove to anyone. You've made me proud. And if these two can't see that, it's their loss. My throat tightened, but I managed to nod. Thanks, Grandpa. That means more than you know. Without another word, Grandpa turned and walked back inside, leaving the three of us standing there in the aftermath of his thunderous rebuke. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Dad cleared his throat, his gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder. Maybe we've made some mistakes, he muttered, the words clearly difficult for him to say. Mom wiped her eyes, her voice shaky. We just wanted what was best for you, Alex. We didn't mean to push you away. I took a deep breath, my chest feeling lighter than it had in years. I get that, but what I needed was your support, not your criticism. Maybe we can find a way to move forward. But it's going to take time. Dad nodded stiffly. Fair enough. Mom managed a shaky smile. We'd like that, Alex. We really would. Later that night, as I stood by my car, Jenna approached with a grin. Well, that was intense, she said with a laugh. Yeah, I replied, exhaling slowly. But maybe it was what we all needed. She nudged my shoulder. Told you showing up would be worth it. I chuckled, shaking my head. Yeah, you did. Driving away from Uncle Mike's house that night, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in years, the weight of my family's expectations no longer rested on my shoulders. I wasn't a black sheep. I wasn't a failure. I was just me, and that was enough.